I worked 70-hour weeks for 5 years to build our startup. Once we got $10 million in funding, the CEO called me into his office. "We're bringing in someone with more experience," he said. As I packed my desk, he added, "Don't worry. Nobody will remember your contributions anyway." 6 months later, his phone started ringing. "Don't worry. Nobody will remember your contributions anyway." The words hung in the air of James's sleek office as I stared at the severance agreement I had just signed. 5 years of 70-hour weeks, reduced to a digital signature and a dismissive comment. I maintained a neutral expression, even as I felt my chest tightening. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said, rising from the chair, professional to the end. "That's me, Sarah Thompson, Senior Systems Engineer or former Senior Systems Engineer, as of 3 minutes ago." James Carter, our charismatic CEO, didn't even look up from his laptop. His perfectly styled hair caught the San Diego sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been installed after our series of funding came through $10 million scale. The company I'd helped build from the ground up. I walked through the open office space, past rows of engineers who had no idea I wouldn't be returning tomorrow. Some of them were working with my code, right now code, I'd written during countless all-nighters, code that formed the backbone of our entire product. The custom system architecture I designed when we were still working out of that dingy warehouse space downtown, when we couldn't afford air conditioning. And I'd keep coding, even as sweat dripped down my back. Heading out early, called Michael from his desk, one of the newer hires who had no idea what was happening. Something like that. I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I packed my personal items quickly. There weren't many, a small plant, a framed photo of my sister's family, and a coffee mug. 5 years. And I could fit my personal effects into a single canvas tote. I'd given everything else to this company. As I waited for the elevator, I felt a chill creep up my spine. James's comment about nobody remembering my contributions wasn't just mean, it was wrong. Every line of that system architecture had my fingerprints on it. The documentation was in my unique structure, designed for my own understanding, with shorthand notes that only made sense to me. I had purposely never created the comprehensive guide that had been on my to-do list for 3 years, always postponed for more urgent tasks. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they closed, I caught one last glimpse of the office that had been my second home. A thought occurred to me then. They really had no idea what they'd just done. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was suddenly very, very aware of my value and of the precise location of every original architecture draft, version log, and IP-related correspondence that had my name on it. I grew up in the shadow of my father's failure. He was a brilliant engineer who designed a revolutionary battery system back in the 90s. When his company went public, they pushed him out and scrubbed his name from every press release. I vowed I'd never let that happen to me. Yet here I was, 29 years old, walking away from Quantum Shift, with nothing but a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement that I had carefully reviewed before signing. The NDA covered company secrets, but it didn't cover my personal documentation process or the files I deliberately sent to my personal attorney before I'd even walked into James's office. I'd sensed this coming 3 weeks ago, the whispers, the closed-door meetings, the way James had started introducing Nathan, the new engineering consultant, to our investors. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. On the drive home, I called my attorney, Emily Harper. "I've been dismissed," I said simply. "They're bringing in someone with more experience." "I see," Emily replied, her voice steady. "And the severance package? 6 months' salary, standard NDA, nothing about intellectual property beyond what was in my employment contract." "Smart girl," Emily said, and I could hear her smile. "The files you sent over look solid. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss options." The next day, I didn't feel the customary urge to check my work email or Slack messages. Instead, I slept until 9:00 a.m. for the first time in years, made myself a proper breakfast, and drove to Emily's office with a strange sense of lightness. Emily had laid out my files across her conference table, architecture diagrams, version control logs, emails that clearly showed my contributions, and, most importantly, proof that I had created the custom authentication system that made Quantum Shift's product unique in the marketplace. "You've been meticulous," Emily said. "Most people don't document like this." "My father taught me to keep receipts," I replied. "So, what do you want to do with all this?" she asked, gesturing to the evidence of my 5 years of work. I sat down, considering my options. I wasn't vindictive by nature. I hadn't been raised to seek revenge. But I had been raised to value my own worth. "Nothing yet," I decided. "But I want to be ready." Emily nodded, understanding perfectly. "They'll come looking for you. Companies like this always do once they realize what they've lost. And when they do, we'll be prepared." I left Emily's office feeling strangely at peace. For the first time in 5 years, my time was my own, and I intended to use it wisely. 3 weeks after my dismissal, I was sitting in a beachside cafe, sipping an overpriced latte and scrolling through job listings, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David Sullivan, Quantum Shift CTO. "Sarah," he said, his voice overly friendly. "How have you been?" "Fine, David," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Well, the team has been working on the next release, and they had a few questions about some of your architecture decisions. I was hoping you might have time for a quick consultation." I took a slow sip of my coffee. Consultation was an interesting choice of words. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given the circumstances of my departure," I said carefully. David cleared his throat. "Look, Sarah, we're willing to compensate you for your time. James may have been hasty in his decision." "Hasty," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" There was a pause. "The documentation is a bit specialized." I almost laughed. Specialized was a polite way of saying that my personal shorthand was incomprehensible to the new team. I had documented everything, yes, but in a way that made perfect sense to me and apparently no one else. "I'm afraid I'm quite busy at the moment," I said. "Perhaps Nathan, with his extensive experience, can figure it out." "Sarah," David began, but I cut him off. "I wish you all the best, David, truly." I ended the call. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from David. "We can double your consultation rate. Please reconsider." I set my phone down without replying. Let them stew for a bit. That evening, as I was making dinner, I received an email from Ryan Parker, one of the junior engineers I had mentored. The subject line read, "You won't believe this." Ryan had always been loyal to me, grateful for the guidance I'd provided when no one else had time for him. The email was brief, "Sarah. Everything's falling apart here. Nathan can't make sense of your authentication system. 3 clients have reported major issues after the latest deployment. James is blaming the engineering team, but everyone knows it's because they can't understand your architecture. David is in full panic mode. Just thought you should know. Miss having you here." I sat down at my kitchen counter, staring at the email. I hadn't expected things to unravel so quickly. Part of me felt a twinge of concern for my former colleagues. Most of them were good people caught in a bad situation. But another part of me, the part that remembered James's smirking dismissal, felt the first flicker of satisfaction. My phone rang again. This time, it was Emily. "I just got a call from Quantum Shift's legal department," she said. "They want to discuss a consulting arrangement. Already." I was surprised at how quickly things had escalated. "Apparently, they're having some technical difficulties," Emily said, her tone deliberately understated. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "I recommend we let them sweat a bit longer," she replied. "The more desperate they get, the better position you'll be in." As I hung up, I felt a shift inside me, the realization that I now held the power in this situation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition of my value. And it seemed that recognition was finally coming. By the 4th week after my dismissal, the calls became more frequent. David, Nathan, even Ryan with unofficial pleas for help. I maintained my distance, giving vague responses when I bothered to answer at all. While they scrambled, I was busy. I'd set up meetings with 3 competing firms, not looking for employment, but exploring the market landscape. I needed to understand my position of strength. On a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after I'd cleaned out my desk, James himself called. "Sarah," he said, his voice straining to maintain its usual confidence. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. The board and I have been discussing your departure, and we feel there might have been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated. keeping my voice flat. About what, exactly? About your value to the company, James said, the words clearly difficult for him to utter. We'd like to bring you back on as a consultant to help with the transition, I almost asked. What about nobody remembering my contributions? But I decided against it, no need to reveal my hand so early. I'm not interested in consulting, I said, but I appreciate the offer. Sarah, be reasonable. We're talking about a significant consulting fee, 6 figures for a few weeks of work. I'm quite busy at the moment, I replied, echoing my response to David. Best of luck with everything. I hung up before he could respond and immediately called Emily. James just called, offering a consulting position. I told her, 6 figures. They're getting desperate. Emily said, but we need to tread carefully. Have you been monitoring their product? I had, indeed. Quantum Shift's client-facing dashboard had been experiencing significant downtime. Their Twitter support account was working overtime, responding to complaints. Their stock price, which had surged after the funding announcement, had dropped 15% in the past week. It's not looking good for them, I confirmed. Perfect, Emily said. I've been doing some digging of my own. Did you know that James presented your authentication system as his own creation to the investors? I felt a cold shock run through me. What? I have a contact on their board. Apparently. James has been taking credit for your work for years. The investors were funding his vision, not realizing that the technical backbone was entirely your creation. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. It was one thing to dismiss me. It was another to steal credit for my work. This crossed a line I hadn't anticipated. What's our next move? I asked, my voice hardening. We wait 1 more week, Emily advised. Let the situation deteriorate further. Then we send a formal notification of retained intellectual property rights. Can we do that? I signed their employment contract. The contract covers work done within the scope of your employment. But your custom authentication system, the one that makes their product unique, you developed the initial prototype on your own time, before you joined Quantum Shift. You have the dated GitHub repository to prove it. You brought it with you, refined it for their purposes. But the core IP could be argued to remain yours. I remembered those early days, clearly coding in my apartment on weekends, developing the authentication system as a personal project before James ever approached me about joining Quantum Shift. I had mentioned this to James when I was hired, but he had dismissed it as unimportant. Now it seemed that dismissal might cost him dearly. So, we have leverage, I said slowly. Understanding dawning. More than leverage, Emily replied. We have a legal claim that could freeze their entire operation if we push it. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. I had walked away from Quantum Shift feeling powerless. Now, the tables had turned so completely that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. 5 weeks after my departure, the situation at Quantum Shift reached a breaking point. Their stock had fallen another 20%, and rumors of client departures were circulating in industry forums. My phone had stopped ringing, a silence more ominous than the desperate calls had been. I was at home, watching a documentary, when my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was shocked to find Claire Morgan, the lead investor from Threshold Ventures, standing on my porch. Miss Thompson, she said, her expression serious. I apologize for the unexpected visit, but this couldn't wait. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. Claire had always been cordial during investor presentations, but we'd never spoken one-on-one. I'll be direct, she said, settling onto my couch. Quantum Shift is in trouble, and I believe you know why. I've heard there are some technical challenges, I replied carefully. Claire fixed me with a penetrating stare. The authentication system is failing, and nobody can fix it. James assured us they had redundancies in place for key personnel departures, but that was clearly untrue. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. What's more concerning, she went on, is that we've discovered discrepancies in what we were told about the company's technical leadership. James presented himself as the architectural visionary, with you as merely an implementer of his ideas. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Is that what he told you? It is. But our technical advisors have reviewed the situation, and it's become apparent that you were the true architect of the system. James misrepresented your role to secure funding. I took a deep breath. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. As am I. Claire said. Threshold, invested $10 million based partly on false premises. That's why I'm here, Miss Thompson. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. James doesn't know I'm meeting with you, but I believe your presence at this meeting is essential. This was unexpected. I had anticipated legal negotiations, not a board invitation. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. I'm proposing that you tell the truth, help us understand what we're dealing with and what options we have. In return, I promise that your contributions will be properly acknowledged and valued. I thought about this for a moment. I appreciate the offer, Miss Morgan, but my attorney has advised me not to engage directly with Quantum Shift without proper legal protections. Claire nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I understand. What if we include your attorney in the meeting? This isn't about cutting deals in back rooms. It's about transparency. The investors need to know what's really happening. I considered her proposal. Attending the board meeting could be risky, but it also presented an opportunity to directly address the people with the power to make real changes. I'll need to consult with my attorney, I said finally. Of course. Claire stood to leave. The meeting is at 10:00 a.m. tomorrow. I hope to see you there. After she left, I immediately called Emily and explained the situation. This is an interesting development, Emily said, earlier than I expected, but potentially advantageous. If you attend, you'll be speaking from a position of strength, not desperation. What about our original plan, the formal notification? We can still proceed with that. In fact, I'd recommend sending it tonight, before the meeting. That way, they'll be aware of your legal position when you walk into the room. I agreed, and Emily promised to send the notification immediately. That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow would be a confrontation I hadn't sought but now welcomed. I wasn't going in seeking revenge, but I was determined to set the record straight. James had tried to erase me from the narrative of Quantum Shift's success. Tomorrow, I would write myself back in this time, indelibly. The Quantum Shift offices looked exactly the same as when I'd left 6 weeks ago, yet everything felt different. I walked through the reception area with Emily beside me, turning heads as I passed. The whispers followed us down the hallway to the main conference room. When we entered, the tension was palpable. Around the long table sat the board members, including Claire Morgan, 3 other investors, and the company's executive team. James sat at the head of the table, his usual confident smile nowhere to be seen. David, the CTO, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Miss Thompson, thank you for joining us, Claire said, rising to greet me. And this must be your attorney. Miss Harper. That's correct, Emily replied smoothly, setting a briefcase on the table. We received your invitation and are here in good faith, but I should note that we delivered a formal notification of retained intellectual property rights to Quantum Shift's legal team last night. James's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You signed an employment contract that clearly states all work product belongs to the company. I'm aware of what I signed, I replied calmly, but the authentication system in question was initially developed before my employment began. I have documented proof, including the original GitHub repository with timestamps. One of the investors, a silver-haired man I recognized as Robert Chen from Magnitude Capital, leaned forward. Is this true, James? Did you know about this? James's expression tightened. Sarah's making misleading claims. She may have had some preliminary code, but anything substantial was developed on company time. I retrieved my laptop from my bag and connected it to the conference room display. With your permission, I'd like to share some evidence. Claire nodded, and I pulled up the GitHub repository, showing the commit history that clearly dated back to before my employment at Quantum Shift. Then I displayed emails between James and me from my early days at the company, where I explicitly mentioned bringing my authentication system to the project. You'll note, Emily added, that Mr. Carter acknowledged Sarah's prior work in these communications, but never formalized any transfer of intellectual property rights beyond the standard employment agreement, which does not cover pre-existing work. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There's more, I continued, pulling up slides from investor presentations. These are materials presented to you during the Series A round. You'll notice that the authentication system is highlighted as a key competitive advantage, but my name is conspicuously absent from any of the credits. Robert Chen removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. James, you represented yourself as the technical visionary behind these systems. I supervised their development, James insisted. Supervision is not creation. I countered, and your supervision consisted mainly of setting unrealistic deadlines while taking credit for the results. David, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. I can confirm that Sarah was the principal architect of the authentication system. Without her, we can't maintain it properly, as the past 6 weeks have demonstrated. James glared at David, but the damage was done. The investors were now looking at James with open suspicion. What exactly are you seeking here, Miss Thompson? Asked another board member. Emily stepped in. My client is not looking to destroy Quantum Shift. She believes in the product she helped build. However, she requires proper recognition of her contributions, appropriate compensation for her intellectual property, and guarantees against future misrepresentation of her work. And if these terms aren't met, James challenged, then the notification stands. Emily replied coolly. Quantum Shift will be legally prevented from using the authentication system, effectively rendering your product non-functional. The reality of the situation seemed to dawn on everyone simultaneously. Quantum Shift's $10 million valuation, their entire business model, hung in the balance. And I, the engineer they had so easily dismissed now, held the key to their survival. The emergency board meeting continued for another 3 hours. As discussions intensified, James's position weakened with each revelation. The board members, initially skeptical of my claims, grew increasingly convinced as more evidence emerged. Robert Chen called for a brief recess, during which the board members convened privately. When they returned, Claire Morgan addressed the room with a newfound authority. After careful consideration, the board has made several decisions, she announced. First, we're initiating an immediate leadership change. James, we appreciate your vision in founding Quantum Shift, but it's clear that there have been serious misrepresentations under your leadership. James's face went pale. You can't be serious. I built this company from nothing, with Sarah's technology, Robert Chen added pointedly, a fact you deliberately concealed from us. Second, Claire continued, we're offering Sarah a new position as Chief Technology Officer, with appropriate equity compensation and full recognition for her past contributions. My heart raced. This was more than I had expected. Additionally, she said, we're proposing a licensing agreement for the authentication system, with royalties on all future revenue derived from its use. Emily and I exchanged glances. This addressed nearly everything we had hoped for. And finally, Claire concluded, we're requiring a public correction regarding the development of Quantum Shift's core technology. Acknowledging Sarah's role as the principal architect, James stood up abruptly. This is a mistake. You're handing the company over to someone who's holding it hostage. No, James, I said quietly. I'm not holding the company hostage. I'm simply ensuring that the truth is recognized. Robert Chen nodded. The board's decision is final. James, you can accept a reduced role as a strategic advisor, or you can leave entirely. The choice is yours. James looked around the table, searching for allies but finding none. Without another word, he stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. In the silence that followed, I realized that the vindication I felt wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. 3 months later, I stood on a small stage at Quantum Shift's headquarters, addressing our team and a handful of tech journalists. The company had undergone a remarkable transformation. Today marks an important milestone. I began with the release of our new platform update. We're not just improving functionality, we're rebuilding on a foundation of transparency and collaborative innovation. The authentication system that had once been my solitary creation was now maintained by a team of talented engineers, all of whom received proper credit for their contributions. The documentation was comprehensive and accessible, ensuring that the company would never again be dependent on a single person's knowledge. After the announcement, Claire approached me, smiling warmly. The investors are impressed with the turnaround. User complaints are down 87%, and we're seeing former clients return. It's a team effort, I replied, genuinely proud of what we had accomplished. True, but your leadership has been the catalyst. By the way, have you heard about James? I shook my head. James had chosen to leave the company entirely, rejecting the board's offer of an advisory role. He's trying to launch another startup, Claire said, but he's finding it difficult to secure funding. Word travels fast in this industry. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. I hope he learns from this experience. As do I, Claire agreed, though some lessons come at a higher cost than others. Later that day, I received an unexpected email from James. It was brief. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I should have valued your contributions instead of trying to diminish them. The company is better off in your hands. James. I sat at my desk, contemplating how to respond. In the end, I kept it simple, James. Thank you for the apology. I wish you success in your future endeavors. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the most painful ones. Sarah, it wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It was about acknowledging the truth, something I had fought for and finally achieved.